Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive here at the Book Summary Podcast.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And I'm excited for this one. We are diving into a book all about therapy from both sides of the couch, the therapist's and the patient's perspective.
Oh, I love this one. Maybe you should talk to someone by Lori Gottlieb.
You hear about therapy all the time, but you don't often get such an intimate look at it.
And especially that dual perspective because Gottlieb is a therapist herself who ends up going to therapy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we see therapy playing out in her professional life with her patients, and then also all the stuff she's working through in her own therapy sessions.
It's like a behind-the-scenes look at what actually happens in that room, the good, the bad, the messy.
And speaking of messy, her journey to therapy starts with a real doozy.
Oh, yeah, talk about a curveball. She's this successful therapist, specializes in relationships.
You'd think she'd have it all figured out, right?
Well, that's what makes it so relatable. Her long-term boyfriend, they're about to move in together, everything seems perfect.
And then, bam, he breaks up with her out of the blue.
And the reason is just brutal. He says he doesn't want to live with a child, even though he knew she had a son when they started dating.
I mean, talk about a gut punch.
Yeah.
And she's totally blindsided. The book really captures that raw emotion, the shock, the betrayal, the grief, the confusion.
And it makes you realize that loss comes in so many forms, you know? It's not just death, it's these ruptures in our lives that leave us reeling.
Even though Lori's a therapist, she experiences these feelings just like anyone else would. It's like no matter how much you know about relationships or psychology, you're not immune to heartbreak.
Exactly. It humanizes the whole therapy experience, you know? It shows that therapists are people too, with their own baggage and vulnerabilities.
So in the midst of this turmoil, she decides to seek therapy herself.
And that's where we meet Wendell, her therapist. Now, Wendell is a bit of a character.
Oh, he's definitely not your typical shrink. His office is this eclectic mix of mismatched furniture. He even sings or yawns during sessions sometimes.
Yeah, it might sound strange, but it's actually intentional. He's using these unorthodox techniques to disrupt Lori's expectations and challenge her.
I love that. Like, he's not just letting her intellectualize her feelings, he's pushing her to actually experience them in the moment.
Exactly. It's about what therapists call working in the here and now, focusing on what's happening in the therapy session itself.
Rather than getting caught up in all the stories from the past.
Right. And Wendell uses this to help Lori understand how she's reacting to him, because those reactions often mirror the patterns she has in her other relationships.
It's like using the therapy room as a microcosm to understand her broader relationship dynamics. Fascinating. So all this is happening while she's also seeing her own patients who are all dealing with their own unique challenges.
It's a real diverse cast of characters. We've got John, this super successful TV producer who's battling anxiety and anger.
Then there's Julie, a young newlywed facing a terminal cancer diagnosis. And Rita, who's in her 80s and contemplating suicide.
And each of these patients kind of represents a different stage of life, you know? And they all come to therapy for different reasons.
It really highlights how universal the need for therapy can be.
Yeah.
It's not just for people with quote-unquote serious problems.
Right. It's for anyone who wants to understand themselves better, work through difficult emotions, or create a more meaningful life.
You know, what I find interesting is how Gottlieb weaves all these different stories together. It's like there are all these different threads that eventually create this tapestry of the human experience.
Absolutely. And we see how each patient's journey resonates with Lori's own struggles in some way. It's like they're all holding up different mirrors reflecting different aspects of the human condition.
This is already so insightful. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast for more deep dives like this one.
Let's start by unpacking John's story a little. So he's this high-powered TV producer, seems to have it all: success, wealth, family. But underneath that facade, he's deeply anxious, has a really short fuse.
Yeah, and the book talks about how he uses humor as a defense mechanism.
Constantly cracking jokes, even about his own struggles. It's a way to deflect, to keep people at a distance.
It's like a shield, right? He's preventing anyone from seeing the vulnerability beneath the surface.
Exactly. And as his therapy unfolds, we start to understand why he's built up these walls. He's carrying this deep wound from his childhood. His mother died when he was young.
And he blames himself for her death. So he's carrying this immense guilt, this fear of loss.
Which manifests as this need to control everything, you know, his work, his relationships, everything. He's terrified of losing anyone else, so he tries to control the world around him.
It's heartbreaking, but it's also a really powerful example of how those unprocessed childhood experiences can shape our adult lives even decades later.
And for John, it's not just about talking about the past, it's about learning to feel those emotions he's been suppressing for so long. The grief, the guilt, the fear.
Right, and that's a message that resonates with a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
We all have those wounds, some bigger than others, and sometimes we need help to face them and allow ourselves to heal.
Exactly. And healing those wounds, it doesn't mean dwelling in the past. It's about understanding how it shaped us and finding ways to move forward.
John's story is so relatable because I think a lot of us, especially men, struggle with that fear of vulnerability. It can be so hard to let people see our true selves, especially the parts that feel weak or broken.
Absolutely. But it's also the key to deeper connection and intimacy, right? It's in those moments of vulnerability that we truly allow ourselves to be seen and loved for who we really are.
So now let's shift gears to Julie. Her story is incredibly powerful, and it really makes you think about how we face life's biggest challenges, how we find meaning and purpose, even in the face of mortality.
So here she is, newly married, and suddenly she's diagnosed with terminal cancer. It's a devastating blow. Your whole world comes crashing down.
What I find remarkable is how she responds to this news. She doesn't fall into despair or denial. Instead, she decides to make the most of the time she has left.
Yeah, she creates this bucket list, which she calls her death sentence bucket list.
It's not about doing these crazy, extravagant things. It's about connecting with her loved ones, expressing gratitude, living each day to the fullest.
Like she goes skydiving, which is this amazing metaphor for facing her fear and embracing the unknown.
And her story takes this unexpected turn, right?
Yeah.
She undergoes experimental treatment, and her tumors actually start to shrink. It's like a miracle, a second chance.
But it also creates all this uncertainty. She and her husband start to cautiously plan for a future they thought they wouldn't have, but there's always this awareness of the fragility of life.
It's a roller coaster of emotions, and it really highlights how none of us know what tomorrow holds. It's a reminder to appreciate each day, to be present with the people we love, and to live our lives with a sense of purpose.
Absolutely. Julie's journey is a powerful reminder to seize the day and not wait for someday to do the things that matter most.
Her story is such an inspiration, and there's so much more to unpack, but we're just getting started with this deep dive.
We've got Rita's story, more about Lori's own therapy, and so many insights about the human condition.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue exploring the world of maybe you should talk to someone. And if you're finding this episode insightful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast for more thought-provoking deep dives like this one. See you back here soon.
Before we jump back into the patient stories, I think it's worth talking about something we touched on earlier, finding the right therapist.
Yeah, that whole good fit thing, right?
It's so important because therapy is so personal. You're really bearing your soul to this person, so you have to feel comfortable and safe.
Totally. Like, you wouldn't share your deepest secrets with just anyone. You need to trust that this person is going to listen without judgment and offer guidance.
Exactly. But it's not just about finding someone who's warm and fuzzy. Gottlieb makes the point that a good therapist will also challenge you, push you a little outside your comfort zone.
So it's like a balance of support A&D, a bit of healthy confrontation.
You got it. Someone who can hold up a mirror to your patterns, but without making you feel ashamed or defensive.
That makes sense. And what's interesting is that she connects this idea of finding a therapist to the patterns we often have in our other relationships.
Yeah. She says we might unconsciously gravitate towards therapists who embody those same qualities we're drawn to or repelled by in our personal lives.
Whoa. So if you tend to date emotionally unavailable people, you might end up with a therapist who's a little distant or detached.
It's possible. And that's where the therapeutic process can be so illuminating. It can help you become aware of those patterns and start to understand why you keep repeating them.
Okay, so the takeaway here is do your research, ask questions, and trust your gut feeling when choosing a therapist. Don't be afraid to shop around a bit until you find the right fit.
Great advice. All right, now let's circle back to our patients and pick up with Rita. Her story, I think, really challenges a lot of assumptions about aging.
It does. It shows that you can still find love and connection later in life. You don't have to just fade into the background.
Exactly. So Rita is in her 80s. She's feeling really isolated, like her life has lost its meaning. She's considering ending it all, which is heartbreaking.
It's a reality for a lot of older adults, though. They feel invisible, like society has written them off.
And what's so beautiful about Rita's journey is that it unfolds organically through this connection she forms with her neighbor, Myron.
It's not this grand romantic gesture, right?
Uh-huh.
It's just this genuine human connection that develops over time through simple conversations and shared moments.
And it blossoms into this sweet, unexpected romance. It's a reminder that love doesn't have an age limit.
It's about feeling seen and valued for who you are at any age.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how this relationship with Myron actually helps Rita heal from the wounds of her past.
Right. She's been hurt in previous relationships, but Myron's kindness and acceptance allow her to open her heart again.
It's like his love gives her permission to let go of the bitterness and cynicism she's been carrying for so long.
And therapy plays a role in her transformation too, right? It helps her understand those past patterns and develop healthier ways of relating to others.
You're right. And I think this is where we see a parallel between Rita's story and Laurie's own journey. Remember how we talked about how their stories seem to mirror each other?
Yeah, it's like they're both at different stages of life, but grappling with similar themes. Loss, love, searching for meaning, and that struggle with vulnerability.
And I think Gottlieb does this intentionally. She's showing that we all share these common human experiences, even therapists.
Right. They have their own vulnerabilities, their own baggage, their own need for connection and healing.
It's a really comforting message, you know?
Right.
Like, it's okay to not have it all figured out. We're all in this together.
And it makes you realize how much our past experiences, especially from childhood, can shape our present lives.
Oh, absolutely. Gottlieb talks about how those early relationships, especially with our parents, create these deep-seated beliefs about ourselves and the world.
Like a blueprint for how we navigate relationships, cope with stress, even how we view ourselves.
Exactly. And it's not always about these big traumatic events. Sometimes it's those subtle messages we pick up, those unspoken expectations that can shape our sense of self-worth.
And the crazy thing is, these beliefs can operate on an unconscious level.
We might find ourselves repeating the same patterns in our relationships, self-sabotaging or struggling with self-doubt without even realizing where it's coming from.
And that's where therapy can be so powerful, right? It helps bring those unconscious beliefs to the surface so we can examine them, challenge them.
Yes. It's about understanding where those patterns come from, but not letting them dictate our present or our future.
Now let's talk about John's transformation a bit more. He was so resistant to therapy at first, but his change was pretty amazing.
Oh, John is a great example of how even the most guarded people can benefit from therapy if they're willing to put in the work.
He starts off so cynical, right? But as he opens up, you see these layers peel back, and you realize there's all this pain and vulnerability underneath.
I remember that part where Laurie notices a pattern in how John talks about his colleagues. He's constantly calling them idiots, morons. But then she realizes he uses the same language when talking about himself.
It's like he's projecting his own self-criticism onto everyone else.
Right. And in that moment, Laurie takes a risk. She shares her own experience with John, admitting she's done the same thing.
It's a bold move for a therapist, right?
Fair.
But it creates this connection, this sense of shared humanity.
And that's when John starts to crack open. He starts talking about his childhood, his fears, his deep-seated belief that he's not good enough.
And as he works through those issues in therapy, it spills over into his relationship with his wife and daughters.
He starts to express his love and appreciation for them more openly. It's like he's finally allowing himself to be loved and to give love freely.
It's a beautiful illustration of how healing our own wounds can positively impact our relationships with others.
And that brings us back to Julie's story and her death sentence bucket list. I think it's such a powerful concept, especially when we think about how we face difficult situations.
Yeah, it's about taking control of your narrative, right? Deciding how you want to spend your time and energy.
Julie could have easily given in to despair, but instead she chooses to embrace life, to focus on what truly matters to her.
And it's not just about checking things off a list. It's about the intention behind it. It's about connecting with loved ones, expressing gratitude, and living each day with purpose.
Like she goes skydiving, which is this incredible act of letting go of fear and embracing the unknown. And it's this powerful metaphor for facing your mortality head on.
And you see this ripple effect, right? Her bucket list inspires the people around her to reevaluate their own lives, to let go of petty arguments and grudges, and focus on what's really important.
Her journey becomes a catalyst for transformation, not just for herself, but for everyone she touches.
Okay, wow. We're getting close to wrapping up this incredible deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone.
There's just so much to unpack. But before we go, if you're finding this episode insightful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast for more in-depth discussions like this one.
We'll be back soon with the final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore some of the final takeaways from the book and talk about some of the broader implications of Laurie's work. As we wrap up this deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone, one of the big themes that keeps coming back to me is this idea of vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability is like this underlying current that runs through all of the stories in the book.
We see it in Lori's own journey as a patient, in her relationships with her patients, and in the transformations they go through.
It's like vulnerability is this key that unlocks something deeper, something more authentic, both in ourselves and in our relationships.
And it's not just about being vulnerable with others.
Right.
It's also about being vulnerable with ourselves.
Exactly. That's where it starts. Being willing to look at our own imperfections, fears, insecurities, without judgment.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be fully human, to experience the full range of emotions, even the messy ones.
And you know what? When we stop running from those emotions, when we actually allow ourselves to feel them, that's where the real growth happens.
Because we can start to understand where those feelings come from, what they're trying to tell us.
It's like becoming friends with those parts of ourselves that we've been trying to hide or deny.
I love that. So vulnerability becomes this pathway to greater self-awareness, to living more authentically.
And we see this play out so beautifully in the lives of Lori's patients, like John, who starts off so resistant to vulnerability.
Right. He's all about being strong and in control.
But as he opens up in therapy, he starts to heal those old wounds from his childhood and build deeper connections with his wife and daughters.
It's like he's finally letting go of that need to be perfect and allowing himself to be loved for who he really is.
And then there's Julie, who, even in the face of a terminal illness, chooses to embrace vulnerability in a whole different way.
She accepts her mortality, but she doesn't let it defeat her. Instead, she focuses on living each day to the fullest, on making memories, on connecting with the people she loves.
Her vulnerability is about letting go of control, surrendering to what is, and finding beauty and meaning in the present moment.
And Rita, who has built up these walls around her heart after years of disappointment, finally allows herself to be vulnerable again with Myron.
Yeah, she takes a chance on love, knowing that there's always a risk of getting hurt.
But she chooses to trust, to open her heart, and in doing so, she finds this incredible connection and joy.
All these stories are like these little reminders that we're never too old, too broken, or too far gone to experience healing and growth.
And that's what I love about this book. It really reframes therapy, It takes away that stigma that it's only for people who are sick or crazy.
Exactly. Therapy is for anyone who wants to live a more meaningful life, who wants to understand themselves better, who wants to improve their relationships.
It's like a gym for the mind, right? A place to work on those emotional muscles and develop healthier habits.
Love that analogy. And just like going to the gym, it takes effort and commitment. It's not always easy or comfortable.
But the rewards are so worth it. Because ultimately, therapy is about finding our way back to ourselves, to our own inner wisdom and strength.
You're so right. And it's about remembering that we don't have to do it alone. We can reach out for support, connect with others, find the guidance we need to navigate those tough times.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our deep dive into Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb.
It's been such a rich and insightful conversation.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our other deep dives, where we explore a wide range of fascinating books that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even inspire you to make some positive changes in your own life.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future episodes.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this book too. Leave a comment below and tell us what resonated with you, what insights you gained, or what questions it raised for you.
We're always excited to keep the conversation going.
And as Lori Gottlieb so wisely reminds us, maybe you should talk to someone. It could be a therapist, a trusted friend, or even just yourself, taking some quiet time for reflection.
The important thing is to find those spaces where you can explore, connect, and grow.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
See you on our next adventure.